So we're going to talk about invoicing now. Keep going there. Pull that up.
Chris, a few questions on invoicing as far as like if there's an invoice, if there's a invoice in progress, can they do an amendment, those types of issues?
Yes.
Just FYI.
Okay. Swap. I don't want to duplicate. Okay. So this is the last slide deck we'll go through, and we'll go through this entirely, and then we'll do a demo of it. So we'll just talk about how you get to the invoices. There's things you can do at the state, place a hold on a project. This concept of miscellaneous adjustments, we can go into more reporting we talked about. So invoices are on the left navigation there under funding. When you have a district in your session, there's funding and invoices. And you can take that and it takes you into the invoices for that fiscal year. You can select that year and whatever funding apps you want to look at. We show you, so for in this case, we're looking at Appleton, and they have, they don't have every single grant, so they didn't get like Title I. So it'll list every grant in the funding app, but they don't have all of them. So it shows you the budget that they have. There's this concept of total available amount. The system can, I guess I would use the term throttle. So you might allocate like $100 million to the districts, but the state of Maine, don't have that $100 million yet to where you could pay it to them. So the system lets you set a funding percentage that factors, that basically says, oh, you know what, only 25% of this money is available so far. So if I have $100,000 in my budget, but only 25% is available, it's going to show me a total available amount of $25,000. Now by the end of the year, the end of the application, you're going to want to be at 100%. But you do have the ability to kind of throttle that, and that's what the total available amount column recognizes. The received amount is what they've been paid to date. The net available amount is just the whatever the total available amount is minus the received amount. And then if they have a pending request in process, it would show up the amount in that right-hand column. And when you click into a grant, it's going to give you a list of the invoices they have for that grant. There's some general information at the top. In this case, they only have the one invoice. It's in draft started, but over the course of the year, they might, if a district's submitting invoices once a month, you're going to see this list grow, and you're going to be able to click in and view any of those that they've submitted. Adjustments are things like refunds. If a district has to send some money back, you would enter that into the system as adjustment, just so the system is aware that that money has been returned. And then you have the ability to put a hold on a project, which prevents a district from submitting additional invoices until they resolve some issue, and that's managed from this page as well. Creating an invoice from that outer page that lists the invoices, there's a link to create a new invoice. Invoices can't be created until the funding application is approved, because invoices go against an approved budget. So if the district doesn't have an approved budget, they cannot invoice on that grant. The system allows them to have one active invoice per grant district and fiscal year. And the framework as they get into it is going to be similar to the funding application. So if you've worked in a funding app, you would be able to come in and work in invoices. There's a sections page. It shows you the current status, and the next status is at the top. You have a series of pages that are part of that invoice. There's validation, there's print, there's a submission workflow. So it's a familiar concept to a district that has worked in a funding application. So one of the things that they will do is they will report their expenditures by object and function. For the ESEA consolidated invoices, there will be a drop down at the top where they select the various projects that hit that grant and report their expenditures, for each of those projects. This page where they report their expenditures is generated against their approved budget. So they're not going to be able to put expenditures in an object function combination that they don't have approved budget on. And if they do have approved budget, there's a validation that makes sure they don't exceed the approved budget by more than 10%. So there's a question, can they revise their application while they have an invoice open? Yes, they can. The invoice is going to validate against the approved application. So for example, if I had $10,000 in my budget there, I could submit expenses of up to $11,000 on that cell because I could exceed it by up to 10%. But if I needed to expend $12,000 in that cell, the system would prevent that, so you can't do that. I would need to modify my budget, revise it to say I'm going to spend $12,000 or $15,000 or whatever amount is in that cell, get that application fully approved, and then that would clear the validation error in this invoice. I would now be able to spend $12,000 in that cell because I have an application where my budget is $15,000. If I hover on a cell, it shows me the approved budget amount. Cells are disabled where I can't. Cells are disabled if I don't have approved budget in that cell. So the expenditures is sort of like the bulk of the request, and then there's this request page that kind of summarizes data from a number of places. It shows them their allocation and budget. They indicate their expenditure time frame. I believe we need to modify this for you to be a begin and end date for those expenditures, from my understanding. So that's something that we're working, that would be forthcoming and would be in place before the districts begin invoicing. And then this basically looks at how much are you saying you spent, how much have we already paid you. So in this case, it's $30,000 that they would be requesting based on the expenditures they're reporting and the amount that they've been paid. Invoices can have related documents. You might have them upload, accounting data or receipts or something that supports the invoice they're submitting. Related documents can be required or optional. If they're required, they'll get a validation error if they don't upload something. I've set this up right now to just require them to upload at least one document for this. If it was optional, they would just get a warning when they went to submit. This validation is much like the validation is in the funding application. It's going to automatically run in the background as they fill out the invoice and save items. Errors are going to prevent submission of the invoice. Warnings will be called out, but they would be allowed to go forward. So in this case, they're trying to say they spent more. They're trying to say they spent more than they have approved. So they have a budget of $50,000 and they're trying to say they spent 60. So the system's giving them an error. Because they could exceed it by, I think, $5,000 by 10%, and that would be okay. But the system wouldn't let them do 60. So that's a case where they would need to either reduce that expenditure or revise their budget to get that number up higher. So once an invoice passes validation, the LEA fiscal representative can move it to draft completed. When it's draft completed, the reviewer at the state. So as I said, we set this up as the consultant or program manager, but Barb, it doesn't have to be that way. So whoever the reviewer at the state is could get an email to go in and review this. And then once that level of review happens, MDOE accountants will manage the process of sending the payments to AdvantageMe. This is something we're building that interface and building that process right now. But again, that would be in place by the time the districts need to submit invoices against these grants. Placing a hold on a project. This is a tool that MDOE can use to prevent the LEA from submitting invoices. It's from that outer project page within the grant. By default, projects are in a status of normal, and you can put a hold on a project that prevents them from submitting. So in this case, we put on a hold, and when we try to move the invoice to draft completed, they get an error message that says that the Department of Ed has placed a hold on the project, and that they would need to, get that resolved before they can submit. So hopefully that's something you don't need to use very often, but it's there for you if you do need to. Miscellaneous adjustments. Again, we talked about this. It's a way for you, the state, to basically put money back into the grant if the district has refunded money to you. Is typically the most common scenario. So in this case, the example is the travel accommodations that were paid were for training that was canceled, so they refunded back $2,400. So this is something that is entered by MDOE as the district in instances where the district sends money back. And then we talked about the reporting already. The reports are typically geared towards fiscal stuff, but you have that as well to kind of manage and keep track of the drawdown of funds that districts are making. Obviously, probably an ongoing issue for you is making sure districts are spending their money before before the funds expire, and so there's reports out there that help you do that. So let me go back in here. So I'll go back to the home page. And we're in Auburn. I'm going to select invoices here from the left navigation. I already have the CT secondary application, which is the one we got approved. If I went to consolidated, for example, I see a bunch of zeros because my consolidated application is not yet approved. So again, these are going against approved applications. So I couldn't do anything with consolidated until I got that approved. I do have my CT secondary grant approved with $100,000. So I can click into there and I can see I don't have any invoices yet. These are the adjustments that the state can do. But as the district, I want to create a new invoice. And so when I create an invoice, invoices don't really exist and not started in the same way that funding apps do, because they are a kind of like a multi-repeatable thing. So they just sort of appear out of thin air when you create one. So when I click confirm there, so I have an invoice that's in the status of draft started, and this should look very familiar to anybody that's used the system. This is my invoice. This is the sections page of my invoice. Again, I can tell I'm looking at Auburn. I'm in fiscal year 2022, and this is a CT secondary grant. It's in the status of draft started. I can move it to draft completed. And something I can do on an invoice that I can't really do on a funding app is I can delete it. I can't delete a funding app, but as I create an invoice, maybe this has created an error, I don't need one. I can delete it because I can just go in and create another one when I'm ready. So the option exists to delete it. We have a history log, the ability to comment. We have a series of pages here, validation, print. So again, it should be a common experience for a user that's worked in one area to come in here and work in the other. So we'll start here on the expenditures page. And again, these are going against your approved budget. So I couldn't put expenditures here because I don't have an approved budget there. But I can come up here and say, oh, I have $50,000 of approved budget. I spent $10,000. Or I have $5,000 of approved budget here. I spent $6,000. So I would fill in my expenditures. And again, I can only fill them in cells where I have approved budget. In this case, I'm going to get a validation error here, which is why I put that, because the max I could do is 5,500. So I'm going to fill that in. I'm going to go to the next page. I'm going to say that I'm entering expenditures as of, we'll say this is July 31st, or July 30th, that I have my approved application. So I'm reporting expenditures of $16,000. I have an approved budget of $100,000. I haven't been paid anything yet, so it's going to generate a payment to me of $16,000. So if I go back to the sections page, I have some validation messages. So if I try to move to draft completed, I don't have my validations turned on, but it will prevent me from submitting this. I have them turned on for ESCA, but not secondary. But if I got a couple issues here. The request amount of $6,000 exceeds 110% of the budget amount. So the maximum amount I could put in that particular cell is 5,500. If I wanted to do more, I would have to revise my budget and get that approved. And then I haven't uploaded anything for the invoice backup receipts. So we'll fix both of those real quick here. So let me upload. Let me select something here. So in this case, I would probably upload a spreadsheet or a scan of something, but I'm just going to upload a generic Word document that is a placeholder for a related document. And I'll call it receipts. So then this is now attached to my invoice, and I can go back historically, even after this is submitted and approved 2 years ago. I can see the receipts that go along with it here on this related documents page. And I also need to update my expenditures from 6,000 to an allowable amount. So I'll drop these down to 5,000. And what this will actually do, this will change the amount of my request to $15,000 because I've decreased my expenditures. So now that I've fixed my issues, I can go back to the sections page and I will move it to draft completed. And I have to sign off on this assurance saying I'm good with that. And then it would come to the state, somebody at the state, whoever is the reviewer at the state for the CT secondary invoices would review it. They could return it back to the district if there were issues, or they could approve it. At this point, it it would enter the process of getting moved to the accounting system, which again, we're still working on that, but there will be a process by which these flow into Advantage.me and get paid through this submitted state accounting system. And then state accounting system paid it would go to. And that would happen by something the accountants do, or by getting some sort of feedback from the accounting system that payment was made, and this system would automatically move it to that status. What else do I have here? Project holds. So if I go back here, I can put a hold on a project and say, treasurer is under investigation for fraud, or whatever, whatever you would do that for. So I can put that hold on that project, and that would prevent the district from submitting more requests until whatever that issue was gets resolved. I can then come in here and I could delete that, and then they would be able to submit requests again. So, so they would do those repeatedly, over the life of the grant until they spent all their money. You wouldn't do the holds, but the invoices. So that's what I have for the demo. I know there were questions. We have some time left. I'm trying to figure out how to see the questions.
You would have to stop sharing, Chris.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if some of those questions got answered over the course of the meeting.
Linda's done a great job of answering the questions, and I know she's been keeping track of the ones that she wants to check in with you on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, there's a lot of questions on if they request funds, and then while there's a request in progress, if there's a reimbursement request against any of the funds that are in there, how is that handled? There's quite a bit of discussion on that.
Okay, so the bottom question that I saw was about only selecting one date, and we are working on something that would have a date range for that. So the other states that we work with up until now, that one date has worked for them. Whatever state we started doing this with, they had one date, and so we created that way. And the other states that we work with, the one date thing has worked for them. But we are in the process of updating that to be a date range for you. Dan, there is a history for holds. So if I delete this hold, so it's no longer on hold, but there is a, oh, you know what? I'm not sharing my screen. Yeah, hang on. So I deleted the hold, Dan. So if I return, wait, still not there. So I deleted the hold. So now its status is back to normal. But if I go to this history, it'll show me these items that I created this hold. This is the user that did it. This is when it happened. And they inserted it. Here's why, and then it got deleted. So if you did those over the course of time, it would track the history on those. Okay. So what was the other
putting in the questions with the responses so that people they want to use this for a FAQ sheet. So
sorry, say that again.
I started putting the questions in my responses.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Is there a way to search filter by LEAs we're responsible for? Yeah, so if I look at this, so I'd only set it up for secondary, and Donna was the only one, and I only gave her one district. I didn't assign the district. Yeah, there is. I didn't assign it to Donna, I guess. But the users that are set up for that particular funding app, you can search within that drop down, and it would only show you the users that are tied to that district. And so what was the question around the invoice? If they drain the funds in the budget category prior to the application being reapproved, where it has the funds moved to another category. Yeah, so if they spend a bunch of money in a category and then they wanted to reduce their budget in that category, they would have to eventually on a subsequent invoice fix that and move the expenditures from that category where they had previously been approved into another category. Dan, I think that was your question. And I don't know, I don't know how far up to go on these, or I don't know if it would make sense for us to just put our heads together and publish something to you on these. Or Linda, you have, I think Linda, you're kind of aware. Linda, I think you're kind of aware, you just want to call out the ones that are recurring. I don't know if I've answered the right ones.
Sure. Let me see. There were 3 of them and I put them, let's see. Okay. Did Chris just say that FY21 year-end reporting will be in the new system?
So allocations and budgets will be brought over from the GEM system. If they can report against that, then that could go in here. If there's more necessary to report on, we'd have to talk to Jeanette about the scope of the data conversion. To figure out what the approach would be on that.
Well, and just to pipe in too, a lot of it hinges on the Tidings Amendment waivers too, right? So if we get a Tidings Amendment waiver for 21 funds, then we're more than we're going to be bringing in the 21 application and everything else that goes with that. If not, the 20, sorry. If not, it'll just be the 21 that will be brought over and then the new 22, if that makes sense with everybody.
So Jeanette, what you're saying is the extension for 20, if that comes through, is going to then finish out in the new system. 21 performance reports and all carryover funds will be done through the new system and not
Correct.
through GEM and
Correct.
the 22 and moving forward.
Correct. Because otherwise the 20 grant would be closing out in September, right? So it makes no sense to bring over a grant for potentially 3 months. So that's why it's imperative teams determine what their next steps are with those elements, because that dictates that data migration.
Okay, are we good on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, Dan had a question on the view only information. Could that be something like the non-public participation amounts?
View only information. What do you mean?
So when you were talking about some of the the non-data pages, where it was a lot of either text-based, or there was something that you had shown that said that one of the types of information that can be shown was a calculated field that they can't do anything with.
Yep.
So if we provide, allocation dollars, or if we provide percentages, and then the system could calculate the non-public amounts based on whatever was left after transfers.
Yes, we should be able to build something if you specify a percentage and we have the amount in the system. I'm trying to think in your application of an example of that. And I don't know.
I don't think we have one yet.
Of one where we have that, but yeah. So if the data is in there and then we can do calculations on it. And I don't know if I have a good example for you, or if off the top of my head I have a good example that I can display. But yeah, on those program details pages, this is an example, and this isn't a calculated data, but these are approved instructional programs, for example. This is data that the state put in there that's specific to this district, and it's not editable in the district. But it's a similar thing where we can just put formulas in, and then that makes that particular cell can't be edited, but that cell is impacted by changes in other areas.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay, one question I don't think I answered fully was from Meg about approvals for application sections. I should have said in there that approvals are for the entire application.
Yeah, so what I would kind of correlate it to is the checklist is, I think those items in the checklist are like you're stating that like a portion of the app, that whatever that checklist section applies to, like you're saying that part of the application is good, but the actual status change at the top of the page from the sections page, this status change applies to the entire application. Whereas, these items in the checklist, are like, okay, hey, the needs assessment, CLNA program quality, that aspect of the application is approved or whatever. But the actual status change, that's the thing. The entire application is in that status.
Okay. There was quite a few questions about deleting users since I used to do that so frequently. I think I got all those.
So we don't actually delete the user. You take their roles and they're inactive. And the reason for that is they did something 5 years ago, right? And they show up in the history log as having done that, or they show up in that change log. Bill Smith doesn't work here anymore, but 5 years ago, he made this status change, or 5 years ago, he updated that value on the page that we looked at in the change log. And we need to preserve the fact that that was Bill Smith that did that. So we don't ever actually delete a user. We basically just deactivate them by taking all of their roles from them. And then Bill can't log in because he has no roles, but he has to historically be there because his name will show up on stuff that he did 5 years ago.
And the reason they don't show up in a district search is because they don't have roles tied to the district anymore, right?
Correct. Yeah. So they're no longer they're sort of in like a purgatory where like they're in the system, their name's out there, we know they exist. We could historically see that at one time they were tied to the district through that. And I did this with somebody. I took a bunch of roles from one of these Smith people. If I go to view their user history, I can't remember if it was Sally Smith or it was this Terry Smith. I had Terry Smith in and out of a lot of districts. So here we go. This is the role history. So in the course of my setting up data and testing, I gave this person a bunch of roles. I removed a bunch of roles. So even a user, so if I go to, if I look at Terry Smith, and I don't actually know, if I just delete all their roles, I don't know if Terry Smith has any roles. Yeah, so Terry Smith still has a few roles. So at this point, Terry Smith is inactive. They have no roles. Terry Smith could not log into the system, but I can still tell, here's all the stuff that Terry Smith did have. And then I can see that Grants4ME administrator took these roles from Terry on this date, and he took these roles from Terry on these dates. And if Terry came back, made a glorious comeback, we could come in and give Terry roles again and they could start doing stuff. But basically, yeah, we deactivate a user, but we don't ever full on delete a user.
That did happen on rare occasion, Chris. Like if we had folks on contract at the state, where they would work, we had 120-day contracts and then they would come back. I mean, it was rare, but we did reactivate users in the system.
Right. Yeah, it does happen.
Okay, a question about the potential for adding multiple users. I let them know that the kind of the primary key is the email address.
Yeah.
Like if two people were helping them, for example.
Email address has to be unique.
Okay, a question about the training today, how it'll be different for the LEA. So they won't see all of these slides when
we'll show. So yeah, there's things we won't show them. Like some of the third slide deck particularly was a lot of stuff about like the MDOE consultant tools. I mean, we'll talk to them about the checklist and stuff because they need to know, and a lot of the content will be similar. But generally, most of what we showed you today will also be presented to the districts. There's certain tools you have that they don't, that we won't talk about, but we will talk to them about things like the checklist because they need to understand the checklist, but from the LEA side, but from the SEA side, just as I think it's useful for you guys to understand the process from the LEA side, like what's happening to the application before it gets to you, and understanding that like you can go look at their applications before they submit them to you. You could just come out here and so, you know, if they call you to ask you questions, you know, you could go look at, I don't know who I have in draft started, but if Augusta calls you and they're saying, hey, I'm working on my application and I have this question about this, you can go in and look at it and you can see it, even though they haven't submitted it to you. Like you go look at it and they have questions about alt use. You can go into that page and look at that with them and talk them through it. And you're going to see the most recent save they've made of that page. So you're going to have pretty well up-to-date data that you're kind of assessing with them. So I think it's useful for you guys, even though you're not filling out the application, to kind of understand, you know, what the district is going through. And so we showed you a lot of the district stuff today. So what they'll be trained on is pretty similar to what was today. There are things we'll take out that are kind of MDOE specific. We won't tell them about the MDOE history log where you can badmouth them, things like that. Like they don't need to know about that. But you know, it'll largely overlap with today's content.
There was a question about creating a dummy district for training.
Yeah.
I
We do have a test district. And I did see that question as I read it. And you're talking, it seems like you're talking about like sessions like your program area does with them. Yes. So, and where there becomes complexity is like, you got to set up all the schools, right? So like we can create a district pretty quickly, but we just need to make sure then we create like schools for them so they would show up in the school ranking page and things like that. Or maybe it's easier just to take an existing district and change their name and change the name of some of their buildings if you don't want to feel like you're hammering on Augusta or Auburn or whatever. But yeah.
Chris, yeah, I think we were looking at potentially setting up like a Pine RSU like
Right.
Gary had in the system where he's got every combination of what a district could potentially see.
Right. Yeah. And so I don't know if we have this, and we may not have it on, maybe it's not on prod, but we typically, I don't know. We have a test district and I don't think we have them set up to show for you, but we could take the test district and call them Pine RSU and give them a handful of buildings so that you could demo with them on the test site. Yes. Travis, you just asked if Nellie makes changes when you're on the phone, will we be able to? So if the district makes a change and they would have to save the page. And then after they save, if you refresh, you would be able to see it. Yes. How do you add content for help for current page? That's an admin function that I think we're setting up a session for you in the next week or two to talk through those things. As an administrator, I can do it. I can just create a help item. I don't know if I'm set up to do it, but basically, as someone who's able to do it, I can come over here and do it. Versus if I couldn't do it, I would just get to see this page and it would show me whatever help there was. Okay.
There was a lot of excitement over the change log, Chris.
Yeah, I saw a couple good comments about that. Yeah, and I think like my understanding right now is you don't have this notion of like revisions. So I'm hopeful that like the process of seeing revisions and being able to easily tell, you know, what's changed and having all those versions saved historically, I'm hopeful that that's helpful to you.
And there was a question about adjustments and connect to, what's it called? The
Apps.
Connect to what?
Basically our accounting people.
Okay. Yeah, so the way the system currently is those adjustments are rare enough that we've never hooked those up automated to an accounting system. So that when they happen, somebody does have to do them in the accounting system and do them in this system as well. If they were frequent enough, it's something we could look at adding kind of like an interface for those to flow. And then it's possible that like if those adjustments happen in the accounting system, it would make more sense for them to flow from the accounting system to our system rather than be entered in ours and flow the other way. We could look at doing that. We've never done it just because they're small enough volume that no one's ever felt the need to do that, but we certainly could.
Yeah, typically we get districts, return checks to us, and then we send them down to our accountants, and then they put it back into basically the accounts. And I believe that they would let Gary know, and Gary would then increase,
Yeah,
whatever on his side of things.
right. And so that would be, I need to go back to Auburn. Okay, I'm still sharing. So if I went in here, what, I need to find a district that has a payment that's fully complete. Appleton. So if I go to Appleton, so if Appleton refunded, and I showed it in the slides, but I didn't demonstrate it, but if Appleton did a refund, Title I funds, like this is basically the equivalent of what Gary would have done, putting it back in and say, oh, they sent back $5,000. And so their amount remaining just increased by $5,000 because they refunded. So I think that's basically the equivalent of what he would have done. You have the ability to do it in the page or in the invoices.
The conversation started with entering negative amounts. There isn't any scenario where an LEA would enter a negative amount, correct?
I mean, they could zero it out and then just move it to another cell. Yeah.
I'm looking through the chat. I think we caught all of them.
Barb, I saw you said you had a different validation on the budget. It's 10% of the total budget rather than the line. We can do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
Barb.
And we'll review these and make sure we hit all of them and send you and responses to the ones that maybe we didn't respond to.
Yeah, a question about revisions opening up certain sections, and I mentioned that the revision opens up the whole application and they use the change log to
Yeah.
determine where changes were made.
So yeah, the change log or the revision details. On a revision, I think revision details is better because the change log is like comprehensive incremental changes. So if they change the same field 5 times, change log would show you 5 entries for that. Whereas revision details just shows you, here's what it is now, here's what it is when you approved it, rather than showing you the 5 incremental changes that don't like historically matter. So like the change log is more of like a comprehensive audit of every field, whereas the revision details is here's the net change from approved to now, whether they made 10 changes or 1, this is what they're submitting to you. But between the change log and the revision details, hopefully, those 2 things make it pretty manageable to track the modifications that they've made.
Question about adding CBOs, absolutely, for 21st century. We have tons of CBOs in here. They're added as a non-LEA.
Yeah, there's a number of organization types that we can have in the system, and we typically in most states have those CBOs applying. So yeah. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end of our scheduled time. It looks like Jeanette already left. I'll thank you on behalf of HMB for joining us today for the training, and we're excited to go live with your state, and hopefully you're excited too. And Linda and I are around to answer questions. If you think of them later, you can email them to us, and we'll work on compiling responses here and make sure we hit everything and publish that back to the group.